morning, Ms. Tabashe. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman.
Are you ready?
We are, Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman, this morning we have Ms. Fourie, Anna Fourie, who will be giving evidence with respect to what she knows in particular about the initial funding that was sought from the Provincial Treasury by the Department of Agriculture. However, in addition to that, DCJ, we have asked her, because of her long service in the Provincial Treasury, in the Free State in particular, to assist us with applying the relevant prescripts, that's the Constitution, the PFMA, the Treasury regulations, to the conduct that she was involved in on that particular day and subsequent thereto, because our terms of reference ask us to have regard to relevant prescripts in particular. So we'll be dealing quite a bit with the PFMA and then with section 216, 217 of the Constitution, and of course with a few Treasury regulations.
Yes. Well, maybe you may just mention that the witness who had not finished testifying last time, what's happening.
Indeed, so DCJ.
Obviously, only what's necessary to say publicly.
Yes. DCJ, with your leave, if we've asked Mr. Marais if he doesn't mind waiting for us to lead the evidence of Mrs. Fourie first. She is on an early flight back home, DCJ. So with your guidance and with your leave, if we might call her now, this morning, we're sure to finish with her before lunch, so that she can actually get back home, because she has an important appointment tomorrow she cannot miss.
Yes, okay, all right, thank you. Let's go ahead then.
DCJ.
She will need to
be sworn in.
Be sworn in.
Indeed,
will you
so.
Please administer the oath or affirmation?
Please state your full names for the record.
She must stand.
Please stand.
It's Honor Susanna Fourie.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No,
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
yes,
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
so help me God.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just to give a very brief context. So today, the evidence will be dealing with term of reference 1.4 and 1.9. The focus in particular will be on the procurement of services, the appointment of implementing agents, the management of the Vrede Integrated Dairy Farm, the correct classification and description of goods and services for purposes of accounting for them. These are important elements in understanding the fundamentals that ought to have gone into all considerations with respect to the Vrede Dairy project and the legal prescripts that bind not only the Provincial Treasury, but also the Department of Agriculture. DCJ, the last point is our bundle. So the bundle that Mrs. Fourie is using is labeled Exhibit HH11. We ask that this exhibit be admitted into the record.
deliver or the file containing the affidavit of Ms. Anna Susanna Fori will be marked Exhibit WH11. Thank you.
Thank you, DCJ. DCJ, just as a final point, we will be using the reference bundle, the legislation bundle, and there's a reports bundle as well that are part of the bundles behind you, DCJ. We have added 1 or 2 pages to the reference bundle and to the reports bundle. The reports bundle only bundle A, Chairman. There are 2. The reports bundle is an A and a B. We only need A today. And
so in regard to the reference bundle, it's
it will
only
be
A?
No, Chairman, the reports bundle
Reports,
is A.
not the reference.
Correct, Chairman.
Okay.
And the reference is D for Donald. D for Donald. We've extended that as well. Do you have a copy?
There are 2 reports bundles.
That's correct.
A
So,
and B.
correct. We're using A for reports, Chairman. Yes.
And then which other one?
Reference bundle, Chairman.
Reference bundle.
Yes, Chairman. And it's D for Donald.
D for Doris.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Then
You
the
say the legislation one as well?
will be A
Yeah.
Chairman,
A for
only.
legislation only.
for this morning's purposes.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes.
Mrs. Fourie, could you please look at what is called your witness bundle, that's Exhibit HH11, and turn to page 1 thereof. Now, the page numbering is on the top right-hand corner. It goes ASF1. Have you found that page? That's page 1. And then if you keep your finger there and look at page 2 of the same document, could you please confirm with the chairman whose document this is, when it was signed, and where it was deposed to?
Thank you, Chairman. That affidavit was signed by myself on the 30th of July in Bloemfontein at the police station.
In paragraph 3 of that document, you make reference to another affidavit that was used in a particular case. You have labeled it ASF01. Now you will find ASF01 behind tab 1 at page 3 of the documents. If you could look again at the name there, page 3, and if you go to page 5 and look at the signature and the date, can you confirm that this is your document?
Thank you, Chairman. I confirm that it is my signature done on the 5th of October 2017.
And this is the document that you will be referring to in your evidence.
Thank you.
Just a bit of background information, Mrs. Fourie. What is your current occupation?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm currently a pensioner. I leave service at the end of June 2018, and thereafter I have assisted on a contract basis the department 3 days a week till the end of September 2018.
And which department would that have been? I didn't get it clearly from you.
I was at the Department of Provincial Treasury.
How long were you employed by the Free State Provincial Treasury?
About 38 years, I commenced duty on the 1st of December 1979.
That's a very long time serving in one organization, Mrs. Fourie. If you will allow the Commission just to take advantage of that and ask you which parts or which components of the Provincial Treasury you have worked in over the years.
Thank you, Chairperson. As indicated, I started in 1979 as an assistant accountant. I went through the levels till February 1995. I became a director, and 2001 I became the chief director, which also have the capacity of the Provincial Accountant General. During that period from 79 till 2018, I basically was exposed to all the financial administration components: salary administration, bookkeeping, expenditure, revenue, debtors and creditors control, trading accounts, financial statements, bank accounts, financial systems, the three transversal systems used by the province, then risk management and internal audit, as well as municipal finance management. The only two areas that I was not directly exposed to was basically budget management as well as supply chain management.
Excellent. But just from that short CV, if one might call it that you outlined, you are very familiar with the provisions of the PFMA as they apply to the Provincial Treasury in the Free State.
Chairperson, yes, I'm familiar with the PFMA.
Excellent. Can I ask you to give the chairman an idea as to what the components are of the Provincial Treasury? If some people call it an organogram, and then could you just describe briefly what each does? And the purpose of the question is just really to give the chairman an overview of certainly the Free State Provincial Treasury.
Thank you, Chairperson. We have the political head, which is the MEC of Finance, in terms of the Act, Section 17(1)(a). She is the head of Treasury. And then we have the Provincial Department of Provincial Treasury, which were at that stage in 2012 headed by a CEO. The name was later changed in 2015-16 financial year to the head of the Department of Treasury. Then below the head of the department, if I can just focus on the Treasury components, not the support part, we have on equal levels basically the Sustainable Resource Management component, Chief Directorate, which report directly to the HOD of Treasury.
What do they do in that unit?
Sorry, ma'am?
In the Sustainable
Unit,
what do they
Resource
do there?
Management.
Yes.
There are four components below that Chief Directorate. I can just mention them. It's economic analysis. They are mainly responsible to conduct primary research to inform resource management in the province. Then fiscal policy. This is, they are responsible for policy advice and to optimize the provincial revenue sources in the province. Then it's budget management. They ensure the effective allocation of provincial resources in line with provincial government priorities and manage the preparation of the annual as well as the adjustment budgets of the province. Then lastly, under them is the public finance component, who is responsible to ensure the effective implementation of the budget and control over the expenditure related to the budget, and also to look at the accurate reporting of expenditure and budgets. Then the next Chief Directorate is the Asset and Liability Management. They consist of asset management and supply chain management. Previously, it was only asset management, but the functions were combined. And that asset management is basically responsible for oversight over provincial financial as well as physical assets, infrastructure coordination and triple Ps, it's public-private partnerships, as well as supply chain management, as said. Then the next component there on the asset and liability is support and interlinked financial systems. They manage and implement provincial systems, that is basically the BAS, the financial system, PERSAL, which is the salary and personnel system, and LOGOS, which is the procurement system. They also assess, as part of their responsibilities, the applications for handwritten checks. Then we have the next component is financial governance. That was the one in which I specifically was. It consists of accounting services, responsible to promote departmental accounting and implement accounting policies and procedures for GRAP as prescribed by National Treasury and the Accounting Standard Board. Then risk management and internal audit was responsible to oversee the provincial internal audit and risk management. Later on, it's actually since the last financial year that I was there, the forensic audits were also placed there, but it was not yet funded at that point in time. Then the other component, the last component at the Treasury side is the municipal financial management, and they deal with budgets, supply chain, asset management of municipalities. And then we only have our more support services, which is the CFO for the Department of Treasury itself, corporate services, and then the internal audit for the Department of Treasury. That's not functions related to the province. Thank you.
So really what you're saying to us is all of those components were available to support departments with the expertise that resided in each one of those.
That's correct. In terms of Section 18, the provincial treasuries may assist the departments, and that was one of the aims of the provincial treasury to assist departments to improve financial management overall.
And then would it also be correct to summarize the broad mandate of the provincial treasury by saying that it is the custodian of state resources and also of the processes that control and monitor the expenditure of those resources?
Yes, Chairperson, that's correct.
You've mentioned...
You said one of the components in the provincial treasury is financial management. Is that correct? Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
Would you like the
Can you
chairman to
hear me?
repeat?
Can you just repeat?
Do you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, I hear you now.
Okay.
Chairman.
Did you say that one of the components or units or sections in the provincial treasury was called financial management?
The financial management part resort under the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, so they are only responsible for the department itself finances. But the other components are sustainable resource management, mainly related to the budgets.
Yeah, no, I was just interested in that one of financial management. So it's not a unit within Treasury on its own. It's simply some aspect, or is it a unit or component?
Yeah, financial management is just, it's basically under the support part of the Treasury, a component that actually only are responsible for the Treasury activities itself.
And you were Deputy Director General Financial Governance, is that right?
Yes, I was in financial governance.
And that is a component or unit on its own within the provincial treasury, and it's separate from financial management.
Yeah, it is component on its own reported directly to the head of the department. The financial management for the department is under the CFO, but they don't deal only with the department finances.
And you were Deputy Director General from when to when?
From 2001.
Up to the time you
Yeah,
retired?
up to June 2018.
Okay, and was your background a financial background in terms of qualifications?
Yes, Chairman, if I understand the question correctly, as from the time that I commenced duty, by that time, the provincial treasuries have not yet exist. It was only a directorate called Financial Administration, and that directorate was responsible for the management of the whole province, salary administration, expenditure, debtors and creditor control, up to the time of the implementation of the PFMA, when the national treasuries and the provincial treasuries were established. This is when these other components were come in and it became the Department of Treasury.
Yes, no, what I was asking was whether your background in terms of qualifications was a financial one
Yes,
or not?
I study BCom.
BCom,
yeah.
okay, no, thank you.
Then the last two very general questions just speak to the Provincial Revenue Fund. The Provincial Treasury is the custodian of the Provincial Revenue Fund. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
What is the source of funds that go into the Provincial Revenue Fund?
In terms of the PFMA, basically all funds must be deposited into the Provincial Revenue Fund. The requirements for the Provincial Revenue Fund is captured in the PFMA in sections 20 till 25. So the equitable share conditional grants are paid into it. All revenue collected by provincial departments are also must be paid into the Provincial Revenue Fund. It is only funding in terms of for the provincial legislature and for the public entities that is paid in their own bank accounts.
Okay, so you're saying the equitable share, that's the one you get from the Division of Revenue Act. That's what the equitable share would be. And then explain conditional grants very briefly so the chairman understands. Okay, so one source is from DORA. Another source is, you say, from conditional grants. What would those be?
Conditional grants, it's also published in DORA, but that is money that is made available and appropriated with certain conditions. So the funding must only be utilized for the specific purpose for which it was appropriated. Where equitable share, the other part of the funds, is discretionary. So there can be decisions taken about.
My understanding is that conditional grants are also tied to national departments. So if we use the example of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the provincial department, the national department, that's the Department of Fisheries and Forestry, can give conditional grants to the Provincial Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
That's correct, Chairperson. The Provincial Department of Agriculture and Rural Development will, for example, submit business plans to the National Department, which will then be assessed, and if approved, then the funding, the conditional grant, will be appropriated for the purpose of the Provincial Department to be used as agreed upon between the National Department and the Provincial Department.
Thank you. Can I take you immediately now to the 15th of June, where you deal with the Vrede Dairy Farm. And could you tell the chairman how...
Is that June 2012?
2012, Chairman. Could you explain to the chairman how you came to be involved in matters relating to the Vrede Dairy Farm?
Thank you, Chairman. On that specific day, the afternoon, there was one of our colleagues which left the department.
The specific date being 15 June 2012?
15 June.
Yes.
Yes, and so there was a small farewell function arranged for her, which we attended. I myself was also there. And while we were there, I was then approached by the then Chief Executive Officer, which is the head of the Department of Treasury, to assist two other colleagues to do an assessment on the payment that is needed by the Department of Agriculture. My understanding from the way that the instruction was given is that it was a very urgent payment that still needs to be done on that very same day, and therefore he requested that we need to go to the office and do the assessment.
So can I ask you to pause? So essentially, you were asked at this function to go back to the office and attend to this particular request that had come from the Department of Agriculture.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Can you tell the chairperson what the quantum, what the amount of money was that was requested on that afternoon?
The amount requested to be paid was 50 million.
Who was the CEO or head of Treasury that asked you?
At that time, it was Mr. Khumungwe.
Do you want to give the spelling, Mr.
The
Bashir?
spelling of Khomongwe is Kgomongwe, Mr. Khomongwe.
Yes, thank you. may
Thank you,
proceed.
Chairman. So continue, what did you then do? So you are given this instruction by your immediate boss, the CEO
Yes.
of Provincial Treasury. What did you then do?
We were then awaited the Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development to come to the venue with the documentation. And then
Can you pause? I just want this to be very clear. So you didn't leave the venue immediately. You waited for the CFO of the Department of Agriculture to join you at the venue.
That's right, because the documentation that was required to be assessed was with the CFO, and she needed to bring it for the assessment.
Yes, continue.
Okay.
And maybe you can just also deal with, was this function during the day or during the evening, and where exactly was this function?
The function was in the afternoon, and it was at a Protea Hotel in Brandweg area in Bloemfontein.
Thank you. Okay.
It's not far, it's about, I guess now, about 4 kilometers from the office.
Okay, thank you.
Can you also give the chairman a sense of the time that you would have arrived at this function and when you would then have left to go back to the office?
If I recall correct, the function commenced round about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was in the region of 15:30, 3:30 the afternoon, which we were informed. And as soon as the CFO of the Department of Agriculture arrived, we then left. She also drove in her own vehicle, but with us to the office, so that we could then look at the relevant documentation which she had with her.
Can you also explain what was going through your mind, because one wonders where exactly you were going to get this money from? I mean, you don't keep money in Provincial Treasury, I presume. How were you going to be transferring this money, should this money be available?
Okay, at that point in time, when we were on our way to the office, I was not even aware of what is the amount that is requested. So it means that only when we were at the office and we received the documentation, it's then that we realized that it is a relative huge amount that needs to be paid out.
And who was the CFO of the Department of Agriculture at the time?
It was me, Sapati Dlamini,
Ms. Lamini.
East Dlamini.
Okay, thank you.
Sipati Dlamini is what the witness
Thank
said.
you.
Yes, continue. So you went back to the office with Ms. Dlamini, and take it from there and continue.
Yes, so it was myself, the then CFO of our Department of Treasury, Mr. Mabicho, as well as a Deputy Director, Masibi Maduko. She was at that point in time working at the Provincial Revenue Fund.
Now, you mentioned Ms. Muduka's name here, but the other chap, what did you say his name was? Msibi?
Mabicho.
Mabitso.
Are you able to give the spelling? Or not really? Well, it can be found out if you are not able to. It can be found later.
Can I give it maybe just a little later
Yeah.
afterwards?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, continue.
You can take a sip of water. We shouldn't rush you.
So when we then arrived at the offices, the CFO, Midlamini, handed over to us the document.
Do you recall what documentation she gave to you?
Yeah, it was the normal payment advice that departments use to prepare payments to be processed on, as well as an agreement which was attached to the payment, an agreement between the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Estina.
Do you recall the date of that agreement?
The agreement was signed on two dates. One party signed on the 5th and the other party on the 7th of June.
Yes, continue. Any other document you were given?
No, that was basically the information that we received.
So you were having this function on the 15th of June 2012, and the agreement between the Department of Agriculture and Estina that you were being given was signed by the one party on the 5th of June and by the other on the 7th of June. So it was about a week-old agreement,
Yeah, yes, more or less.
more or less, yeah. Yes, you may continue.
Please
You were
continue.
given the
Thank you.
agreement and the documents, and what happened?
Thank you. So it is then at that point in time that I realized that it's actually not a normal small amount, but a huge amount that need to be paid. So the first document that I then look at to see if it's attached to that payment advice was the financial report, which indicate normally the budget and expenditure already incurred and commitments
Hold on. By whom? By which department?
by the Department of Agriculture.
Good. So you looked at your first source document. What have they got left? What have they spent?
Yes.
Continue.
So at that point in time, unfortunately, that report was not attached to the documentation provided to us. So I indicated to the CFO of the Department of Agriculture, as it's normally required that before you do a payment, you must confirm that you have the funds available. We actually should need the confirmation of that. But then, in the meanwhile, she didn't have it with her, so she couldn't provide it. that report also, it must be withdrawn from the system, so that was not available. But then we go further and I broadly look at the agreement, the content of the agreement that was provided, because that was basically the source on which the payment to be made was based on. And when I browsed through that one, I realized that in terms of the content of, on page 3 of that agreement, there was a sentence stated that Estina submitted a proposal on the 15th of May 2012. So from that, I then asked the CFO of the Department of Agriculture, that means then that there was not a tender process followed for the appointment, but the appointment was done based on the proposal that was submitted, which she confirmed.
Can I just ask you to pause for a second? Chairman, just for your purposes, when you look at the documentation later, that particular agreement can be found in reference file. We will not look at it now, Chairman, because it's common cause. In reference file B at page 619. It is part of the bundle.
Thank you.
Okay. So because there was not an official tender process followed, the next requirement then was in terms of Treasury Regulation 16A 6.4. In certain circumstances, the Provincial Department may deviate from the procurement processes, but then there must be an submission approved by the relevant accounting officer of the department, and then the reasons for the deviation must be stated in that submission.
Did you have that? Did you have that submission?
Unfortunately, there was no such submission attached to the document, and it could also not be provided at that stage by the Chief Financial Officer of Department of Agriculture.
Yes.
Then, based on the last two facts, the fact that the procurement process was not followed, and in the absence of a deviation approval, I then indicated that should the payment proceed, that will result in irregular expenditure because the normal procedures were not followed. And what was not clear is because we could not prove that the funding was there, available and appropriated. If the funds were not available, then it could result in unauthorized expenditure. Okay. Further, the next matter that I just asked, because we do not know, if there was a feasibility study executed for the implementation of the project. That was also not available at that stage to us. Looking at the contract, or not, so apology, not contract, it's an agreement. At that agreement, the obligations of Estina was really not very clear, linked to time frames, exactly the deliverables, what is expected from them. Furthermore, it was indicated that Estina will contribute a phase-in investment of 228 million towards this project. However, there were no specific time frames linked to when that will be done, although in terms of the 342 million which the government, the Department of Agriculture need to contribute, that was in detail specified how and when it must be paid.
Can I ask you to pause just for 1 minute?
Sure.
And because you are dealing with the issues that concerned you as you were looking at the two documents you were given and trying to see how you could advance this money to the department. So your concerns you are noting for the chairman now, Can I also ask you to pick up reference bundle, Estina reference bundle D for Doris?
D.
Yeah, D. And if you could go to page 1328.
Yes. It's a
Yes,
letter.
and just hold on to that. So as soon as you finish tabulating all your concerns, I want us to look at that letter. I don't know if you've got more concerns that you want the chairman to note.
Now, the last one, Chairman, that I have raised was, in the absence of not knowing if this 342 million was available over the MTF period as appropriated, I verified, but the contract or the agreement also did not make provision that this project could be terminated if there's no funds in later years. So it means that it actually indicated that it can only be terminated if there's breach of contract, and if it's terminated for any other reason than the breach of contract, then the government will be liable, the Department of Agriculture Rural Development, for the remainder, to pay the remainder of the contract amount. Thank you, that's my last.
Can I then ask you to, you've got your finger at 1328. Can you then go further back to 1366, same document? Yeah, just go further back in the file.
1366.
And could you read into the record, maybe you should start at 1366, the concerns that were raised by the state law advisors on exactly the same matter.
I read the letter from the Department of the Premier to Mr. Peter Tapete, the Head of Department of Agriculture, agreement between Department of Agriculture and Estina. We refer to the meeting with the Director General to discuss the above mentioned matter. In order to finalize the agreement, we request the following information. What are the interrelationships between the parties? What are the details of the business model on which this relationship is premised? A costed project plan? Full details of the obligations and the rights of the respective parties, a copy of the results of a detailed study mentioned in paragraph 2.2 of the Executive Council memorandum, full details on milestones, deliverables and timeframes. Lastly, memorandum of incorporation of Zyna Investments and its current shareholding. Immediately we receive this information, we will commence with the drafting of this agreement.
Now, I will say, just in the interest of summarizing the evidence, that the letter at page 1328 deals with more or less the same concerns. Those concerns appear to be very similar to the concerns you have tabulated, your own concerns. What did you then do when you picked up these issues, if one might call them that?
It was my view of the assessment that we cannot proceed with the payment based on the reasons already mentioned. But the CFO of the Department of Agriculture indicated that they met the next morning already the other party, and they need the payment by then, so it's very crucial.
Hold on, just slow down. So as you were going through the material you had before you, the CFO then indicated that she needed the money before meeting Estina Pty Limited the following day.
Yes.
So she wanted it immediately.
Yeah.
Continue.
Before that, you told me the concerns that you noted, okay? Did you articulate these concerns to the CFO, and what was her response, or was the response that you have just told us the response she gave you when you told her your concerns?
While I was assessing the document, as I identified the concern, I immediately shared it with both the other two colleagues as well as the relevant CFO. Also to allow her that maybe if she could provide the relevant info to us, which
Yes.
was just not there, that we have the opportunity to obtain that. That was the purpose of it. Yes.
And her response was that it was crucial that payment be made.
Yeah, she indicated that the payment is very, very urgent, and because of the agreement, and the agreement is officially signed, we just need to do the payment. So it was at that time then that I see we are going to have some difficulty. So I phoned our CEO of Provincial Treasury, Mr. Gemungwe. I briefly indicated to him that where we are at that stage, I foresee a problem that we won't be able from Provincial Treasury to do the payment, except if it will be made an instruction. But in that case, then it means he will have to also come to the office so that we can brief him also. And depending on what the decision, or he can then inform our MEC of Finance, so that decisions can be made in terms of Section 64 of the PFMA. Section 64 of the PFMA indicated that if an executive authority wants to give instruction for a payment to be made, which may result in unauthorized irregular expenditure, then it should be in writing. The reason why we follow that route is that we by that time already know it's a very critical payment for the Department of Agriculture, and we see our risk involved in that. And we were of opinion that we will then escalate it up to our MEC if needed, so that when the Department of Agriculture MEC being informed that we don't want to pay, that our MEC will be aware of the situation and also have the detailed facts so that they can communicate with each other.
But before you proceed, you told the CFO of the Department of Agriculture, here are concerns, I don't think we can pay. She says to you, it's crucial because it's urgent and there's a meeting that had already been held in the morning. I would expect you to say, but you know we can't pay. Did you say something like that? And what did she say? I want that conversation, the whole of that conversation.
I indicated to her, but based on all these matters that we raised, it will not be possible. But still, she insists that she must have the payment. And that is on that point in time that I then asked me, Meduka, this was the colleague from that working with the Revenue Fund, to verify if we have 30 million, in any case, in the Provincial Revenue Fund. The reason being that normally the Provincial Treasury invests money so to earn interest. So we do not keep that amount of money in the accounts, it's on investment. And then I just thought by myself that if the money is not available, we cannot pay, because by that time it was already after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so the banks were closed and everything. And I thought that could be also a further motivation not to do the payment and to explain to the CFO then, in any case, we will not be able to pay.
Yes, you see, the person that you were talking to is a chief financial officer
Yes.
of a government department.
Yes,
And the chief financial officer of a government department should be knowing the PFMA very well, isn't it?
I totally agree, Chairperson.
So you are the Deputy DG Financial Governance for the Provincial Treasury. You are talking to the Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Agriculture, who wants you to make a payment that appears to you on the basis of concerns that you have articulated to her. She wants you to make a payment nevertheless. My expectation is that the conversation would go along the lines, Ms. So-and-so, on what basis do you say I must pay when you don't have this and that and that? So I'm interested, I expect the conversation to go along those lines.
Yes,
What's the basis? You know the PFMA, you know the processes. I've told you the concerns. On what basis do you say we must pay? I want to hear whether that, even if it's not in those terms, whether that was said and what was the response.
Well, I clearly stated to her that based on our concerns, we cannot do the payment. And I indicate to her, she also, as Chairman, you already stated, she knows the PFMA and the rules that apply. But this is when she stressed the fact that their appointment is already arranged and the people are coming from abroad.
Yes, but I guess you have to say, why do you make arrangements for payments to be made in breach of the PFMA? You know.
We raise that question. We even, you see, the payments processes, or if I can just say, in terms of the PFMA and the operations, every department make its own payments. So at this stage, we even indicated that if they are aware, if they were aware of this arrangement with Estino, why didn't they make the payment through their own system in time? But now that's late at a Friday afternoon, they come with the information. Our normal arrangement at Treasury is that if they want handwritten checks to be issued. Unfortunately, that is true. We do not allow, or by that time, and I believe still now, the Provincial Treasury did not allow provincial departments to issue handwritten checks. If they want a handwritten check, they must apply to the Treasury. But then...
Can you pause for 1 minute? So they were expecting to get a handwritten check from you. The mic won't pick up a nod.
If you note, the mic won't
yes.
Record that.
Yes, because that's the only way that we could make a payment which they can take with them to have a document, a check for the Saturday.
And you're saying they did not use their own funds in their own departmental account?
No. What I'm saying is we did... the departments make their own payments. So as they prepare the payment document and they check it and they authorize the payment, they capture it on the financial system called BAS, and the payment is processed and it will be done. So Treasury is not normally involved in payment procedures. However, if they want a handwritten check to be issued, it is only then where the Provincial Treasury came involved in. But then also we had arrangements in place to say at least the department must submit a proper submission. So they must prepare a submission requesting the handwritten check, motivate the reasons for it, and submit it before 10 o'clock in the morning. And it must be submitted to that component called Assets and Liability Management, Interlinked Financial Systems.
That's in terms of your own
procedures. It's in terms
procedures.
of the Treasury instruction. Yeah. Yes, Provincial Treasury instruction.
And if I'm not wrong, assets are dealt with in Treasury Regulation 10.
We issue the instruction in terms of Treasury Regulation 18.
18.
18.
Thank you.
yes.
So,
Mr. Bashe, I interrupted her before she could tell us what the COO said.
Responded.
So maybe you can take it from there.
so there are two matters you've raised in your discussion with the CFO. The first one relates to the concerns you had. You pointed those out to her. And my understanding of your evidence is she said, I have to have that money by tomorrow morning. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's it.
You then also indicated that you asked Mrs. Muduku to check in the Provincial Revenue Fund to see if there was money in case you could assist the department. Take it from there, please. And then tell the chairman what your discussion was in relation to whether the money was available in the Provincial Revenue Fund and what you communicated to the CFO.
And maybe before that, there was the COO part, if I understood correctly. I don't know if I understood correctly. Understood you earlier on, and I think I interrupted you, to say while you were having this meeting with the CFO, you called the COO of the Provincial Treasury. And I think I interrupted you before you could tell us what he or she said, because you said you were reporting that there was this situation and there would have to be an instruction if you were to pay.
Yes, it was a telephone call to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Gumongwe of the Provincial Treasury, because I saw...
Oh, I'm sorry, it was CEO, not COO. Okay,
yes.
all right, thank you.
Because I was seeing where this thing edged to, because
Was going.
we could see that the CFO of the Department of Agriculture is adamant you want the payment, and I could see that we will not be able to do the payment based on the information with us. So then the CEO indicated that we must continue with our assessment, and as soon as we finish the assessment, I can call him. Then he will come and he will then, based on our findings, we will brief him, and from there then he can consider and take further decision. Yes. So
Then there was the issue of you phoned Miss.
Muduku checked
Yeah.
the
Yes.
Provincial Revenue Fund for you.
Meduku was with me.
Yes.
Yes. She was with me in the meeting. She also went from that venue with us.
Okay.
So I just requested her, she was there in the meeting, to verify the status of the funds for us.
What did she find out, and what then happened? What communication happened between yourselves and the CFO of Agriculture?
She came back with a report which she drew from the Provincial Revenue Fund bank account, indicating that there are less than 6 million in the bank account, in the Provincial Revenue Fund bank account, which then I indicated then to the CFO with the proof, because we have the proof of the account, saying that based on the time where we are, it must now be clear to her that there is no possibility that the Treasury can pay 50 million if they only have less than 6 million, because the money must be transferred from the South Africa Reserve Bank to the Revenue Fund if we wish, and they are closed. Then
No, stop, just explain that. So what was in the Provincial Revenue Fund was just below 6 million.
Yeah.
But you've now also given further evidence to say that must be transferred from the South African Revenue Service. I want you to explain the word that, what you are referring to.
As I earlier indicated, if we have, if I can call surplus funds or funds that's not immediately used in the Provincial Revenue Fund, then the Provincial Treasury is allowed to invest that money. And normally they invest at the South Africa Reserve Bank, and then they could also invest in the relevant bank like Standard Bank where the bank account was. So if we draw money then from the investment, it needs to be done through the processes, and the Reserve Bank needs to transfer the money. But by that time, the Reserve Bank was also closed. So there's no possibility that that can happen that time at the Friday afternoon. Now, based on my discussion earlier with my own CEO, Mr. Gumungwe, I then indicated to the CFO of the Department of Agriculture that at that time, I think we were already together for more than an hour, and she's in a hurry because she said she still needs to drive to I think it was Sasolburg. Then I said to her that, as she now said, we provide her with the reasons why we can't pay. We provide her with evidence that we do not have the 50 million. So for me now to call our CEO, she needs to indicate if the CEO, after he have now been briefed, are prepared to pay 5 million, which is available, will they then be satisfied with it? And her response to me was, she wants 50 million or nothing. And to be honest, I was so relieved because that actually resolved the problem for me. Because then I said to her, because you are in a hurry, then it means you can leave. Because if you don't want the 5 million to be considered, it's also not worthwhile wasting the CEO's time. And then, she was not happy, but she left. And I then called the CEO, Mr. Gumungwe, and informed him this is the situation, so we don't have to come into the office, but I will just brief him on the Monday, the 18th, on the issues that we found and why we could not make the payment or recommend the payment to be made. Which on the Monday, I then briefed the CEO, and he gave me permission to consult the state law advisors.
That's in the Premier's office?
In the Premier's office, yes. So I got an appointment on that very same Monday with Mekuni from the state law advisors. And
That's,
Hang on, I'm sorry. Before you proceed to your discussion with the state law advisors, the meeting that you were having with the CFO of the Department of Agriculture was on a Friday afternoon.
Yes.
Did I understand you correctly that what she said to you was that she needed the money for the following morning? Is that correct?
The Saturday morning.
So she needed the money to be paid to Estina on a Saturday morning, is that right?
Yes.
Was that usual for a government department? Do you know what is usual for government departments to make payments on weekends?
No, it's not usual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
we will deal a little later after tea with the nature of this payment. We'll deal with advance payments and different types of payments. But maybe just to tidy up the evidence you're giving this at this point in time before tea, could you just take us through your discussion with the state law advisors as advised by Mr. Gumungwe?
I indicated to the advocate that I'm concerned that the content of the agreement, although it was signed, that it's not for the best interest of the government. And I provide to her the same reasons that I already explained, which were my concerns.
Yes.
And she then agrees that I can provide her with a copy of that agreement, and she will then do an assessment on that, which she really gives to it immediate attention, because on the 19th, it's just the following day, she already provided us with a letter whereby she indicated that she agreed that the procurement process was not followed, and she put it that it seems that the contract is invalid.
Is that the letter that is found on page 7 of your bundle, of your witness bundle? If you look at page 7
Of this,
of your bundle, yes, exhibit HH11, there's a letter at page 7.
that's correct. So do you want me to read it?
No, the chairman has understood that she then communicated to you. Just tell the chairman what she exactly communicated to you again.
She, it appears that the procurement process was not followed. The contract may be invalid due to a number of reasons. And then she we suggest that you propose to the Treasury Committee that the agreement and the procurement documents be sent to us for review. Which then, when that was discussed with Mr. Gumungwe, our CEO, he indicated that because of the urgency of the matter, he will actually directly consult with the head of the Department of Agriculture Rural Development. He don't foresee a problem that it being officially referred to the state law advisors, which he then did, and the head of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development referred it then to the state law advisors.
Chairman, I don't know if you want us to continue or if you'd like to break for tea at this point in time.
We, I think, still have about 4 minutes before the
We can-
tea break. I do want to go back to the meeting involving yourself, Ms. Fourie, and the CFO. You were taken out of a function that you were attending, and you were asked to go to the office to assess whether payment should be made in regard to effectively a request that was coming from the Department of Agriculture. Other than the fact that the Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Agriculture said she needed the money for the following morning, were you ever told exactly why they couldn't wait until the following week? What was going to happen that would be so bad that it shouldn't happen? Why they wanted it to be on Saturday? What was going to happen if they got it the following week on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday or Friday? What made this whole thing so urgent? Were you ever told that?
Chairman, no, I was never given the factual reasons for that, except as I indicated, we indicated the department could have made the payment through the normal process, which I think she also, the CFO also alluded to the fact that the contract was only signed a week ago, so it is an urgent matter. I try also to explain to her that but that was my personal view. It's not somewhere stated or prescribed. I just indicated to her that to pay 30 million as an advance payment upfront to any company is a huge amount for nothing. By that time there was no service or thing, so it's a prepayment. Now the rules, the PFMA provide for prepayments, but I mean you need to be careful on what you paid. But she just indicated that that's part, and it was true, it was part of the negotiations and it was stated in the agreement, and that's true. The agreement stated that the 30 million must be paid up front.
In terms of the PFMA, do you recall what requirements are laid down for a prepayment? Or is that something that you wouldn't recall?
There's just
Or some of them?
in Treasury Regulation 15, I will just say 1510, I think they speak about. So what is important in terms of the regulation is that each department must have manual or require their own procedures for cash management requirements.
Yes.
And I just want to check if I can quickly get that instruction.
But what,
Under 1510, Banking and Cash Management, 1510 1.2, C, indicated then, for the purpose of this regulation, sound cash management includes, then C say, avoiding prepayments for goods or services. Example, payments in advance of receipt of goods and services unless required by a contractual arrangement by the supplier. You see, and this is why I'm saying, unfortunately, the department agreed in the agreement.
so that particular regulation allowed it if it was agreed between the,
That's right.
which I guess doesn't help much if
Yeah.
you allow it to be agreed. But there may have been certain circumstances that, or requirements that must be met before you can even agree. You would not remember, or would you?
Yes, the normal.
You can't just agree willy-nilly to make advance payments.
The normal procedure for advance payments should at least be that, let's say a department needs to do advance payments, that, say, through the CFO, a submission be submitted to the head of the department as the accounting officer, and he then approve, but that they motivate, just provide at least reasons for that advance payment, specifically for the amount to be paid. But as I said, that was agreed in the agreement, and we.
But in terms of what this amount was going to be used for, was that clear from the agreement, or were you told what it was going to be for, apart from that it had been agreed in the agreement?
There was no detail in the agreement specifying what the 50 million, if I can just verify, then can say where it's stated.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can check during the break, but also in terms of what you were told, you were not given any details by the CFO what the 30 million rand was going to be used for.
No, she just referred me to the agreement and say
Yes.
that was signed and that is in order in terms of the treasury regulations, which I could not dispute.
When you mentioned that one of your concerns was that there was no feasibility study, did the CFO not say anything like, no, there is actually a feasibility study and we can give it to you?
Each of the concerns, I basically asked if she can provide us with the document. And for none of it, she indicates that she could be able to give it to us.
Okay, thank you.
Just for the record, Chairman, the feasibility study was only conducted in October
Yes.
of 2012, and this request was placed before the Provincial Treasury
yes.
in June of
Yes.
2012.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think we can take the tea break now. Let's resume at 25 to 12. We'll adjourn for tea. Yes, let's proceed once Ms. Fourie is ready. Thank you.
Ms. Fourie, can we proceed? Are you ready? Can you switch your mic on? Thank you. I just want to tease out one or two matters with you. One of your concerns related to the project costing, and it's certainly a concern that was raised by the state law advisors as well. Why would it be important for you to understand the project costing for this particular project before you gave money?
Thank you, Chairman. It's not that it's really that important to myself before I paid out, but it's important for the accounting officer and the CFO of the relevant department so that they can exactly know what they are going to be paid for, what will it cost them, because in terms of one of the responsibilities of the PFMA, of the accounting officer, it stated that you need to ensure the efficient utilization of your resources. So it's important for them to have that done.
So you would say that it's part of the responsibility of an accounting officer to know exactly what expenses he's committing a department to?
Yes.
Was the CFO able to explain to you why such a large amount of money was being sought from you?
Unfortunately, not. She didn't provide, or I cannot say she did not provide. She only indicated that the agreement requires them to pay the upfront payment of 50 million.
Did she?
So, I'm sorry, Ms. So, Ms. Fourie, have you got all your documents that you want to look at? I think you were looking for something. I want to give you a chance to look for that and be ready for my question. You are ready?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, I get the impression you are struggling to hear me. Is that correct?
A little bit, yeah.
I wonder whether that may be because of any technical issues. And Mr. Kabasha, I don't think it should be that you need to switch off yours, because in the past when yours was on and all were on, there didn't seem to be a problem. I think we'll continue, but if the problem persists and it's serious, we might have to take a break and ask the technicians to attend to it. But we'll try and avoid that in the hope that they can do that during the lunch break. But I wanted to say, in other words, when you asked the CFO why there had to be this advance payment, in effect, her answer was because we agreed to make an advance payment.
That's correct, Chairman.
Yes, okay.
Now, I've also understood from the reading I've done of statements and the PFMA that there is a format to asking for money from the provincial treasury. So if a department needs funds, there's a set format for doing so. Am I correct?
Yes, Chairman.
Could you please explain that norm to the chairman, what the convention is, what the practice is?
Thanks. Chairman, based on the approval of the appropriation, what normally happens by the end of February each year, a department submit what we call the cash flow projection for the next financial year. That is to provide the indication of how the appropriated funds will be spent throughout the year. To also give an indication to Provincial Treasury how they will draw the money appropriated. Then on a monthly basis, all departments submit, it's called a fund requisition. It depends on the time frame set by the Treasury, and normally it differs from the 20th till the 25th or 26th of a month prior to the next month. They submit the form indicating the required funds for the next month, both for voted funds, the equitable share part, and then separately for conditional grants if they need the conditional grant payments to be made in the next following month. They also specify normally salaries separately because salaries are paid on specific dates. That assists just the flow of money and assist with the investment of money by the revenue fund. Then after that, the Treasury assessed the fund requisitions received, and they communicate back to all departments, provincial departments, if they agree, if the money will be available, and they will then be able to transfer it into the department's bank accounts, called the Paymaster General accounts. On a weekly basis, then there's another form that the departments also submit to the Provincial Revenue Fund within Treasury to say, for each week, this is the amount that they will need for the week. And if they need to amend it during the month, that there's something unforeseen, then they will also communicate that to the Provincial Revenue Fund to indicate they have estimate to use, say for example, 5 million in week 3, but they now determine they will need 12 million, then they will also communicate it. And then the transfer of the actual funding take place every week. They transfer the revenue fund, transfer it into the bank account of the departments.
So what you've just told us really also supplements the answer you gave to the chairman earlier, when the chairman wanted to know why this money could not have been dispersed the following week, why the CFO could not have waited for Monday or Friday or whatever day. Because what you are explaining to the chairman is that there was a system for a department to draw down funds, as long as they had those funds, of course. So there ought not to have been any urgency, knowing that there was a weekly mechanism in place for them to ask you for these funds. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So because they can facilitate and do their own payments, they could have requested the funding for the next week, and then they could make a normal payment through their own processes.
And they would not have to come to you because the money would be in their bank account.
That's correct, Chairperson. They will do it without any intervention from Provincial Treasury.
Can I move on to a related aspect? Now, evidence will be laid that at best 30 million rand had been budgeted for the 2012-2013 financial year for what is called the Mohuma Mobung initiative or strategy. Now, my understanding is that the Vrede Dairy project fell within that broader strategy, but we're still trying to get a full explanation on what that strategy was. Be that as it may. If for present purposes, we accept that this 30 million was budgeted for under Mohuma Mobung, and if we accept, again, just for current purposes, that the contract with Estina committed 114 million rand per annum over 3 years, would it be correct to say that in this first year, 2012-2013, there would have been a shortfall of 84 million rand because only 30 million had been budgeted for?
That's correct. except if that money could be getting from somewhere and be appropriated in the adjustment budget. But the normal requirements are that that before you basically enter into an agreement, you need already to confirm that the funds are available.
In fact, that's one of the responsibilities of the head of department of a department such as agriculture. And those responsibilities you find in section 38 to 45 of the PFMA, am I correct?
That's correct,
Could-
Chairperson.
Could you just look at section 38? It's rather important, 38.1 and 38.2. And in respect of 38.1, just point out the more important responsibilities of an HOD. And then if you could just very quickly look at 38.2 and read 38.2 into the record.
Okay.
So in relation to 38.1, I just want you to highlight one or two important aspects that really would be relevant to these monies that were being sought from you, to monies that were or may have been budgeted for, and to monies that would indicate that there would have been a shortfall in any event, yet a commitment of 114 million was made per annum over 3 years.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to highlight, say, as the question raised, it posed specifically in relationship with this matter, so I will do it that way. But my belief is that all responsibilities listed under sections 38, 39, and 40 is equally important. Also, if we would look at section 81, it was stated that if an accounting officer do not comply with any of the provisions of these three sections, willfully or negligently, that can result in financial misconduct. However, or to respond to the specific questions, I will highlight 38.1.3, which required an appropriate procurement and provisioning system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. Also,
Can I just ask you to pause there? So that particular provision speaks to section 217 of the Constitution.
that's correct, Chairperson.
Continue.
Then C2 indicate that appropriate must take effective and appropriate steps to prevent unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless expenditure.
Again, if I ask you to pause there, your concerns relating to the agreement and to the terms of that agreement would speak to somebody not paying enough attention to how state resources were going to be applied because they agreed to an advance payment that had no specification to it, or milestones, or deliverables to it.
Yes. The next one is, I skip it, was B, is responsible for the effective, efficient, economic, and transparent use of resources of the department. Then 38.2 is also very relevant to this matter. It's an accounting officer may not commit a department to any liability for which money has not been appropriated.
Yes. Now, where an accounting officer fails to comply with these prescripts, what is the correct action to take, and whose responsibility is it to take such action? And I'm asking you just to, again, just ground us in the provisions of the PFMA and the Treasury regulations.
May I just before I answer, just indicate in terms of the requirements for the of the CFO, the responsibility, because that is very important for the support to be provided to the accounting officer in the execution of his responsibilities. In Treasury Regulation 2, it is stated that each department must have a CFO, and then it goes further to indicate a chief financial officer is directly accountable to the accounting officer without limiting the right of the accounting officer to assign specific responsibilities. The general responsibilities of the chief financial officer is to assist the accounting officer in discharging the duties prescribed in Part 2 of Chapter 5 of the Act and the Annual Division of Revenue Act. These duties relate to the effective management, financial management of the institution, including the exercise of sound budgeting, budgetary control purposes, and the operation of internal controls and timely production of financial reports. I just want to advise that. Chairperson, coming to the question related to if there are non-compliance, in terms of Section 81 of the PFMA, if it's the accounting officer, the matter needs to be investigated by the executive authority. I just want to get it here. But as it says, there should be proof that it happened, there was negligence or willfulness in the non-compliance. Then if we move to the regulations, which are a little more in detail, in Chapter 4,
there's Regulation 9, which deals with unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, of course.
In Chapter 4 is the investigation of financial management, financial misconduct. Normally, it should be done within 30 days to determine if it is indeed financial misconduct.
But here again, you're referring to which particular regulation in Chapter 4?
Okay, I'm referring to 4.1.2.
Yes, it is in. Yes, I've seen that.
You see.
I know that you wanted her to only highlight the important ones.
Yes, Chairman. Maybe.
Which she can do, but we shouldn't spend too much time because we can read the Act and the regulations ourselves.
Yes, Chairman. The idea is to tie in the behavior, the conduct that she observed, that she was exposed to, and the conduct she's familiar with within Treasury, to the conduct of the officials who we are dealing with here.
Okay.
Can I ask you this question to assist you? Because the Chairman is right, we don't need to dwell too long on pointing out some of those misaligned forms of conduct. For present purposes, would you be aware of the remedial measures that a provincial treasury can take to prevent overspending of a vote, such as a vote within the Department of Agriculture? Again, here I'm looking to how you would be assisting a HOD or a CFO in the manner in which they are conducting the business of government in their department.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just on the previous question, because the question was related to financial misconduct, possible financial misconduct by the accounting officer itself. The relevant regulation is 4.1.3. You can refer to that. In terms of the
Remedial
processes
action,
and
yeah.
the oversight of budget versus expenditure, departments submit on monthly basis expenditure control reports they report to the provincial treasuries. Provincial treasury, that is the Sustainable Resource Management Chief Directorate. They did the assessments of the reports, and they also prepare a report then based on the information to the National Treasury to report on the implementation of the budget as far as expenditure for both voted funds, equitable share, as well as conditional grants are concerned. In terms of Section 59 of the PFMA, if a department projected any overspending for a particular financial year, they need to indicate it in that report that they submit. They further also need to indicate measures remedial actions that they will take to prevent the over-expenditure. And then provincial treasury, that relevant component, could also prescribe certain measures that the department needs to implement so that they can curb down the expenditure. So, for example, in provincial treasury, that component have, for example, not only for agriculture, but for all provincial departments, issued cost containment measures because of the limited financial resources in the province. And the fact that the indications are there that if not careful, they will overspend.
Are you aware at all of any budget that had been allocated to the Vrede Dairy project?
Unfortunately, because I'm not in that specific component, I cannot really provide the detail of the budgets related to it.
That's fair. That's a fair answer. But can we go a little beyond that and talk to your oversight of implementing agents? So Estina would have been an implementing agent, but it of course was also a management agent. Now, what oversight role would Provincial Treasury play in trying to resolve a particular service provider being both a management agent and an implementing agent? I'd like to think it's a governance issue that would fall within your area of expertise.
Now, that is actually part of the oversight role that is done by the asset and liability management under supply chain. They do assessments of some, unfortunately they can't do all of it, so on a sample base they do some assessments and then they communicate to the relevant departments on their findings.
But would it be usual for a service provider to be appointed as both a managing agent and an implementing agent?
No, that will not be usual because it means you are a referee and a player, so you actually monitor yourself, so it will not be usual.
So you're supposed to implement, but at the same time you're managing what you're implementing, and there's an incongruence there.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I ask a little beyond, this particular commission isn't just looking at the relationship between the Department of Agriculture and Estina, but it's looking at everything that happened at the Vrede Dairy Farm. In that context, we know that the Free State Development Corporation took over when the Estina management left in August of 2014. And again, the Free State Development Corporation was appointed as both, as I understand matters, an implementing agent and a service provider. Why would this way of doing things persist? Yet you have told us that it ought not to, because it means that service provider is a referee and a player.
Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be able to say why it happened, because I was not part of that decision making. But my understanding was from the financial statement perspective that FTC managed the project on behalf of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
1 second. Sorry. Yes, you may proceed.
So you are saying you don't have any personal knowledge of that particular appointment?
No, Chairperson, I don't.
But did you at any point get involved in dealing with the difficulties that arose in relation to the assets, in relation to the governance issues that tended to occur at the Vrede Dairy Farm? Because we're really looking at the operations at the farm.
Yes, as I said, from the financial statement perspective, I have some experience and engagements. Because when the FTC, the year when they reported after they were appointed, there was questions raised and disagreement between FTC and the Department of Agriculture on who should report the assets in the financial statements.
Now, can I ask you to pause just to explain the assets? So you're talking about the buildings on the farm, you're talking about the cattle that had been purchased, you're talking about the equipment that had been bought. That's what you're calling the assets.
Yes, and then there was also the immovable asset, that is the farm itself. But the immovable asset, the farm, that we have determined because it was registered in the deed of the province, that was reported by the Department of Public Works in their financial statements, which mean any improvements that affect the value of the farm should be communicated to Public Works so that they can incorporate it there. But the main matter was related to the equipment, the cattle, that type of assets, which we then provide clarity to indicate because the assets were only managed by FTC, but it's actually the assets of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development till such time that it's been donated and transferred to beneficiaries. It should be reported in the financial statements of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
So are you saying that it was not, those assets were not reported as departmental assets, but as FTC assets?
It was indeed not reported by any of the two. So there was no reporting on those assets in the financial statements, neither by FTC nor by the department.
And yet the law clearly provides that where the department had furnished the money, had provided the money, those are departmental assets.
Yes, and if there was assets, for example, that were not yet completed, let's say the dairy was still in process of completion, then it must still be reported by the department as work in progress in the financial statements.
But if the department was not reporting on the assets they held at the farm, who took responsibility for securing those assets? What would the norm be?
Right. The norm should have been that at the time that they terminate the agreement with Estino, because the agreement was between Estino and the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development should have taken over the assets. So they should have verified, get the list, confirmed that this is what they've taken over. At the point in time that they then appointed FTC to manage those assets, there should again be a verification between the department and FTC so that FTC can confirm that the assets that the department say, these are the assets that they manage, that it actually exists and they are going to manage those assets.
Yes. There has been evidence led at this hearing that cattle were stolen. So those are the assets that ought to have been secured by somebody, just to illustrate the point that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
I agree, Chair.
But the ultimate responsibility for securing those assets really would be with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
That's correct, Chair.
You see, because the important point is that if one looks at the picture very holistically, it's one thing to delegate responsibilities to another, but accountability for certain things remain with the department. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. It's only the responsibility that's delegated. Accountability remains.
With the department?
Yes.
So the department should be able to answer all the questions that I'm raising with you, because the accountability remained with the department.
That's correct.
Can I move on to a slightly different aspect? And that is just in helping us understand transfer payments. My understanding is that when monies were paid to the service providers, whether it was to Estina or to the FDC in this instance, these payments were done by way of transfer payments as opposed to being classified as payments for goods and services. Are you able to assist the Commission at all understand the difference in the accounting treatment between a transfer payment, what it is, and how you treat it in the accounts, and goods and services, what those are, and how those would then be treated in the accounting system?
Thank you. Chairperson, in terms of goods and services, that is where you procure goods or pay for services to be used by the government for the government purposes. And with regard to transfer payments, I need to indicate that there was, at a certain stage, a lot of confusion, because in the previous period, also as far as the requirements for reporting was, financial reporting was done according to the classification done by the budget. So if an amount was budgeted as a transfer, then in the expenditure side of it, it was also reported as a transfer payment. But unfortunately, I don't have the date now with me, but at a certain stage, it's after this 2012 period, I think it was around about 14, 15, 15, 16, the National Treasury amended the modified cash standards, whereby they then indicated that the reporting of expenditure in financial statements must be done according to the accurate reporting classification of the relevant goods or service that were used or procured. And this is where the main confusion then came in, Because if the budget was then, the information from a budget perspective was budget as a transfer, but the expenditure incurred against that budget was for goods and services, it have this difficulty that your expenditure versus your budget are not aligned. So in the past, the departments also look at, and that was not only in Free State, it was across the country more or less, they rather look at the end result of the goods that were procured. And if that goods, for example, if it was for a beneficiary, it should have, it was accepted that it's not for the department, so it was, say, it's unrequited. So then it was regarded as a transfer payment that was made. So originally, years back, there was not really, implementing agents were not utilized. The money budgeted for was transferred mainly to the relevant beneficiary for farmer support and so forth. The difficulty that the Department of Agriculture and even others experienced with payments directly to beneficiaries was that the money was then not used for the purpose it was provided to them. Instead of, for example, buying cattle, they bought a car or something like that, and that creates also a lot of audit queries. In an attempt to improve the controls, the department then get to this appointment of implementing agent with the aim that the implementing agent will assist the beneficiary to utilize the funds more effectively and for the correct purpose. So in the Free State, the agreement was prepared as an agreement between the department, the implementing agent, and the beneficiary. And that is why, at that point in time, the view was that although the payment is done to the implementing agent, it is spent for the benefit of the beneficiary. And ultimate, the project is for the beneficiary, and it's regarded as transfer payments. With that change in the modified cash standards, then it came to the attention through the audit processes that that classification, according to the Auditor General, was not correct. That was in 2015-16. At Treasury, with the attempt to support departments, we have established an audit intervention committee whereby departments could raise issues for us to assist with, and also the Auditor General could raise issues where they did maybe not receive timely responses from departments or any such. So that matter was then referred to that committee, and I myself referred that classification matter to the National Treasury so that they can give us clarity. In 15-16, unfortunately, it was only in the Free State that the audit reports have highlighted this problem, and if I recall correctly, it was in about 5 departments. So for looking from a National Treasury perspective, I just take it that it didn't seem for them that crucial. And the problem was not resolved in the next year. But during the 16-17 financial year, because also from an auditor's perspective, they tried to be consistent in their approach across the country, they raised similar issues in 8 of the 9 provinces. And then the National Treasury also became aware that it's really an urgent matter that needs to be resolved. They appointed a working committee which have worked on this matter, but only in May 2018, the National Treasury issued Circular 21, in which they then clearly state the difference and the interpretation of these transfer payments, which basically boiled down to the fact to say the immediate use of the money must be used for the classification and not the end use of the money. So, and that brings a total different interpretation, because if a department paid in cash and the beneficiary will utilize it, him or herself, it means it will be a transfer payment. But if the department utilizes an implementing agent to procure these goods on behalf of the department and then hand over the goods to the beneficiary, it will be a transfer payment. It was also then stated that there must be a clear differentiation in terms of transfers. If a department transfer to, for example, a public entity, and the money transferred is for the mandate of that entity, then it's a transfer payment. But if they transfer money to an entity and it's for the entity to perform functions on behalf of the department, it's goods and services. I hope I explained.
You see,
1 second. I see that there are certain cameras that have been put up. Take it they are TV cameras, other than those that I authorized when we started last year. There are only 3 TV cameras that I've authorized. There shouldn't be any others without any requests having been made and authorization having been granted. So those should be put down. At the time that I granted the authorization, an arrangement was made that everyone would be able to have access to the recordings of those that were authorized. I take it that that's still possible. So please, let's stick to the ones that are authorized. If that works out any particular prejudice to anybody, they must follow the right processes to make a request and not just put up cameras anywhere in the venue. Okay, let's proceed.
thank you, Chairman. Ms. Sfori, you see, I asked the question, and really you've pointed to all the issues that arise in relation to how implementing agents are expected to conduct themselves, and at the same time how the monies that, and I'm moving on from your first scenario. Your first scenario was when beneficiaries were given funds. There was a bit of a difficulty there. You then revised it by giving, well, government revised it by giving the money to implementing agents. And there I paused to point out Estina was an implementing agent, and it was supposed to hold the assets or manage the assets at the Vrede Dairy Farm on behalf of the beneficiaries. But even there, the monies that were paid to Estina were paid as transfer payments. Those transfer payments were used to purchase goods and services. So in this instance, cattle feed, etc. The difficulty that arises, even on that model, is that nobody is able to account properly for those goods and services that were purchased because they were given a lump sum money, basket of money as a transfer payment. Now, my understanding is when you are given money to purchase goods and services, you can produce invoices with ease to prove that those goods and services were purchased with the money allocated to goods and services, but not so with these transfer payments that are paid in lump sum. Have I understood the system correctly, or am I putting too many issues into one summary?
It is correct, Chairman, that if if you make a transfer payment, you basically pay an amount, and the institution, whoever is receiving it, will utilize it, and you will not check what it's for.
In fact, you at Treasury can't really monitor how that money is being spent.
No, we can't do that, yeah. But as I thought to indicate, so the classification, I trust that it's now after National Treasury have clarified that definitions and interpretations, that from the budget perspective, those budgets will in future or in the current financial year, 1920, I trust that that was now also amended, so that instead, as in the past, it was budgeted as transfers, it should now be budgeted as goods and services. Because if that, it needs to be rectified from the budget perspective. Because if it's correctly budgeted, the departments must apply the basic principles. It will just be easier for the departments then also to do the correct classification.
Is it possible for an HOD or for the CFO, usually I suppose it's the CFO, to say to the Auditor General, who asks them to rectify this system of payment, that they will not do that, they will not correct what they're being asked to correct? And I'm really talking about transfer payments and accounting for goods and services and the payments, accounting, the way you account for these.
In normal circumstances, Chairperson, the Auditor General audit, they have their findings, they communicate the findings to the accounting officer for management to do their assessment, and the department will then respond to the Auditor General indicating either they agree or they disagree with the finding of the Auditor General. And then if they agree, normally they will do the amendments that's required. If they disagree, this is where they will then not implement the amendments. So, and in this case, what happened, as I strive to explain, that because of the way that transfer payments in the past were interpreted, it was done on the end result of what was done by the money, and then it was related as transfer payments. And because of the agreement that they had between the department, the implementing agent, as well as the beneficiary, it was seen that it's not the department's assets, it's for the beneficiary. So based on that, the department disagree with the view of the Auditor General, and they also stated that, and that is why it was referred to the National Treasury for conclusion. And you will, I'm sure you will understand the fact that that was already reported with the audit of the 15-16, but it was ultimately only resolved in May 2018. It does illustrate that it was not that straightforward matter, and so that is really what happened.
So what might have been some form of misconduct between 2012 and, you say, about 2018, when National Treasury ultimately issued its directive, that conduct cannot be called misconduct of any kind because of the confusion that reigned during that period.
Chairperson, I will say that the classification issue, in my view, cannot be regarded as misconduct. However, that doesn't mean that all the other activities that take place or took place could not be possible misconduct, because there are still requirements in terms of assets. Now, in terms of specifically Vrede Dairy, if we can take that as an example, the cattle and the equipment and so forth was on the farm. It was not yet given to a beneficiary. And because of that, there should be control over the assets.
Yes.
But, yeah, so I just say we need to differentiate between the difficulty on the classification and the more practical matters.
So where there was a failure to have control over those assets, you are saying that may be characterized as some form of misconduct.
That's right.
It depends on the facts, on the
Yep.
objective facts. One of my last questions, Mrs. Farid, just relates to, again, these transfers. Infrastructure transfers, what are these? If you don't know, that's fine. I can raise it with another witness.
Infrastructure assets or infrastructure transfers means the funding that is budgeted to improve infrastructure. So it will be roads or buildings, infrastructure in the province.
Oh, so not necessarily on the farm, if we take the Vrede Dairy Farm, but the roads around the farm, outside of the borders or perimeter fence of the farm.
Yeah, infrastructure, if we just relate it to the Vrede Dairy, remember the dairy itself is a building. So that will be an infrastructure because it improves the value of the farm.
So a specific payment could be made just for the buildings under the heading infrastructure transfers.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll explore that further with the HOD when he appears before the commission, because provision was made for that infrastructure transfer on the annual performance plan for the Vrede Dairy Farm. But you have no personal knowledge of any
No,
of that.
that will be the sustainable resource
HOD.
part of it.
Yes. Are there any other matters you would like to bring to the chairman's attention? And really here I speak again about your monitoring, your oversight of departments, but if we could be very, very specific here and deal with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and specifically again with the Vrede Dairy Farm. Are there matters you want to raise with the chairman in connection with these?
Chairman, I think we have dealt with all the matters. I think the only matter that I can perhaps highlight is, as also briefly indicated, we struggled since 2015-16 till 2018 to resolve the transfer goods and service classification, which basically also contributed to the adverse audit opinion given to the department. But there were other matters like the non-reporting of the assets, which could have been addressed while the classification matter is still under review. But despite our recommendations in that regard, the department decided they continue not to report that. Thank you.
Chairman, those are the questions I will raise with this
Yes.
witness.
Okay, thank you. Just in case I missed this, you had this meeting with the CFO on the Friday when there was a function and it ended on a certain basis. And the CFO of the Department of Agriculture left to go to Sasolburg or wherever she was going. And you said you talked about what happened on Monday. You consulted with the state law advisor and so on and so on. But was that the last part in which you were involved with regard to the 30 million rand?
Chairman, yes, that was the last when I was involved, because then the matter was sorry, further dealt with between the department and the state law advisors with regard to the agreement, and I was not involved in any further payments that they have made here.
Okay, no, thank you. If you are done, then
Thank you,
you
Chairman,
are
I
done.
am.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Fori, for coming to give evidence. We appreciate it. You are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chairman, if we might just adjourn for 5 minutes while Ms.
Yes.
Molefe prepares to come and continue leading the evidence of Mr. Maria.
Yes. Okay, we will adjourn, and you'll let me know once you are ready.
Thank you, Chairman.
We adjourn.
All rise.
It may be that it would be more convenient that we take the lunch break now, rather than start, use 15 minutes, then stop, take a break for lunch, and then come back. And then we start earlier than 2 o'clock. Then so that when we start, there's no interruption. My recollection is that I had been told that we needed something like an hour. I don't know whether it was said 2 hours more for Mr. Marie. Is that correct? How much more do we need?
Thank you, Chair. We had previously requested about 2 more hours to complete Mr. Maria's evidence.
And that still remains the assessment.
Indeed, so, Chair.
Yes. I think let's rather take the lunch break now. It's now about 16, 17 minutes to 1, and then we resume at 1:45. Then we can have his evidence uninterrupted until he finishes.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Marie, you understand that?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Yes. I think it's much better than that way than if we start now, stop in 15 minutes and then come back later. So let's take the lunch adjournment now, and we will resume at 1:45. We adjourn.